I think Kamala Harris probably does have fair bit of a potential upside. When I interview voters about her, their immediate response is, "Oh no, goodness, she'd be terrible. Everybody hates her." And then they stop for a second and go, "I'm not sure why everybody hates her, though."
Let's go live to Washington now. The Times of Washington correspondent Alistair Dorber is there for us. Obviously, still early there in the US, Alistair. America just waking up to the realisation that there will be someone else running against Donald Trump.
That's right. The odds look very favourable for Kamala Harris, but that's not a done deal yet. It looks as though we had people like Gretchen Whitmer and crucially Gavin Newsom of California, the governor of California, coming out last night and endorsing Kamala Harris. They were two potential rivals. So it does look as though it's going to be a coronation, but we won't know that for sure until the middle of August in the Democratic convention. But as we stand this morning, it's commas to lose, as it were.
Is there anyone who could realistically run against her who hasn't yet publicly backed her?
Yeah, I mean, there's a senator called Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Now, he left the Democratic Party earlier this year. He's been a thorn in the side of the Biden-Harris administration pretty much since it got going 3.5 years ago. He suggested yesterday that he might rejoin the Democratic Party and throw his hat into the ring. I think what a lot of people in the party are concerned about is that Kamala Harris doesn't get tested. She dropped out of the presidential primary race in 2020 very early. In fact, in 2019, she dropped out at the end of 2019. So she didn't really take part in the sort of the rough and tumble of that process. And were it just to be a coronation without any challenge to her at all, I think many people would think that she would go into a general election campaign against Donald Trump, who, let's face it, is now something of a seasoned campaigner, without much, without having been tested too much. So there may be a bit of one or two people coming forward and challenging her. Interestingly, Barack Obama in his statement last night didn't endorse Kamala Harris. I think he favours something more of a contest, but it's very difficult to see in the time frame and with some of the people who've already endorsed her that she would get a serious challenge at this point.
Interesting that Donald Trump spent so long attacking Joe Biden as being too old, too past it, too doddery. Actually, he might be better keeping that to himself and then running against him. Instead, the rest of the Democratic Party's sort of come to the same conclusion. And, I mean, it potentially makes life much harder for Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump is now the oldest nominee ever to stand for president. Of course, Joe Biden's older, but he's no longer the nominee. So it's a problem for Donald Trump. Polls say or have said that Americans don't want either Trump or Biden. They want someone younger. And Kamala Harris is a much fresher face. She's a generation, almost 20 years younger than Donald Trump. And poses all sorts of problems for his campaign. Now, he, I think, will attack her heavily on the border. She's been notionally in charge of securing the border, which she's manifestly failed to do over the last 3.5 years. So that's a real area that Trump can attack her on. But she has weapons in her armoury as well, as far as that's concerned. I mean, Donald Trump blocked a border bill. She's also been much more vocal, much tougher on things like abortion, where a lot of people, I think, will swing behind her.
Well, it'll be fascinating to see how it pans out. Alistair, really good to speak to you. No, I'll speak to you later in the week. Alistair Dorber, the Times of Washington correspondent. And Kamala Harris due to speak at the White House later, an event celebrating college basketball teams. So the first time we actually hear from her. But how does she shape up against Donald Trump in the polls? James Johnson, regular on the show, as you know, co-founder of JL Partners, former pollster in Number 10. He's now in the US polling the election and joins us now. James, what impact will this have on the race? Take us through the numbers.
Well, at the moment, Kamala Harris isn't polling that well against Donald Trump. We released a JL Partners some polling last month, back when Joe Biden was still in the race. So caveat, people may well change their minds after the event. But as it was then, Trump had a 6-point lead over Biden, 43% to 37%. We tested other hypothetical candidates against Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris comes out pretty badly. In fact, Trump was 11 points ahead of her on that same question, 49 to 38. Now, as I say, there's a good chunk of don't knows and people saying they wouldn't vote. That could include people who perhaps are sort of, Biden fans who said, "Oh, I'm not answering this question," which it could shift once the race shifts. But certainly at the starting point, Kamala Harris is not in a great position. And other polls we've done, we found that people thought that Kamala Harris was the worst vice president in history. And other approval ratings polls from other pollsters show that indeed she is one of the least bad. She is one of the worst polling vice presidents in the history of the office. So certainly not a strong starting point.
Is there any sort of precedent of where someone goes from being a hypothetical to being the real deal? That actually this is an electrifying moment in American politics, whether you're pro or anti Democrat. Everyone will be sitting up and taking notice and re-engaging. Is the sheer act of changing leader? I mean, there's obviously positives, but there's also potentially negatives to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen it happen in the UK actually. If you'd have polled, for example, how Keir Starmer would have faced up against Boris Johnson in that leadership election back in 2020 for the Labour, you had lots of the Corbynistas refusing to say that they'd back Labour and Keir Starmer, and then actually come the moment Keir Starmer was made leader, they fell in behind Labour. So I think there is a precedent for this, and I think there is a potential we'll see that. I think, despite those numbers, I think Kamala Harris probably does have fair bit of a potential upside. When I interview voters about her, their immediate response is, "Oh no, goodness, she'd be terrible. Everybody hates her." And then they stop for a second and go, "I'm not sure why everybody hates her though." And actually, they're quite open-minded, So there is potential to impress there. Alistair was saying there, she's got potential to be a bit more strident on abortion than perhaps Joe Biden was. She's also got a bit less baggage than Joe Biden on, for example, the Israel-Gaza issue. Huge problem for Biden with his base, particularly younger voters. Again, when I talk to voters about that issue, that their criticism was very centred on Joe Biden personally. They weren't bringing Kamala Harris into the mix. Maybe that won't matter because she was his vice president, but she might have a slightly blanker slate on that issue too.
It's interesting as well, I suppose, because it's such an odd job being vice president. Anybody who's watched Veep, I mean, it is obviously a comedy show, but it does also highlight you are the second most powerful person in the world, but also the least powerful person in the world. And, it's quite an odd job to sort of pick your way through. How do you have an impact without upstaging or contradicting the boss? And actually, if she steps out of that shadow, and obviously it depends who her running mate is, does it just look like a massive generational shift, which some of those young people who were, whether it was on Gaza or just the fact that Joe Biden looked like their great-great-granddad, does this mobilise particularly young voters in a way that the Democrats haven't really managed since the days of Obama?
It could do. Look, I think the enthusiasm for Kamala Harris is still pretty low.
Yeah.
She's also, not the best debater. She's not the best. She's certainly not the best at giving speeches. So it's, there's a big uphill battle to climb. Trump is still the favourite. But look, yeah, it is possible. Two very quick things on that. First is the African American black vote. Getting their turnout up is absolutely key for whoever's facing off Donald Trump. She's obviously the first black woman to be on a major party's ticket at the top of the ticket, so that's going to be a potential important factor. The other is it's just really worth stressing that the way that voters and swing voters have viewed this race has been through the prism of age. The real discussion always, when you talk to voters, when you do the interviews, the focus groups, is, goodness me, both of these candidates are old, we need someone new. Look, it's a big task for Kamala Harris to define the race in that way, but it is just possible that some of the age criticism does focus on Donald Trump. Let's not overstate that, though. They saw a near 80-year-old Donald Trump push to the ground, drop to the ground after being shot at, and then stand up straight away and start holding his fist up. They don't think this guy's weak.
Really good speech as ever, James. James Johnson there from JL Partners, joining us live from the US, where he's polling the US election.